This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. To pre-order Tarkir Dragonstorm, use my link in the description. Hi everyone, I'm Nitzahone, and it's Saturday. That means it's time for Nitsa Notes, my weekly vlog series about limited magic. And I just finished up my set review for Tarkir Dragonstorm earlier this week, or I guess last weekend, more accurately. And as usual, in the first edition of Nitsa Notes, after the set review, I'm sort of going to do what is kind of a Cliff's Notes of my set review, where I talk about the 3 best commons and the best uncommon in each color. I do have a few drafts under my belt as a result of the streamer event. There should be a couple of videos up on the channel of some of those drafts. But I don't think it's had a major, it's a small sample size. It hasn't had a huge impact on how I'm going to rank these cards. There is maybe one exception that I'll talk about when I get there. But basically the point of this video is to give you a shorter, more digestible video where you can get the really important information about what I think are the best commons and uncommons in each color. Because those are the most important things in Limited, the quality of commons and uncommons. I do want to remind you that if you become a channel member or a patron, you get access to a spreadsheet that has all of the grades from the set review. You can find out how to do that in the description. All right, let's dive in and take a look at the best commons and uncommons for Limited in Tarkir Dragonstorm. And we're going to start with white. I think white might be the deepest at common, although as we'll see, green is also pretty deep, but white is very deep. I think the third best white common is Stormplane Detainment. So, this is the Oblivion Ring effect we get all the time. There's not really any special synergy for it in this format. It's just a good card though. It's 3 mana for a sorcery speed removal spell is not insane. You're probably overpaying a tiny bit, but it can deal with anything, any non-land permanent, and it deals with things even that are indestructible, which there are a few of in the format. So, it's a good removal spell. It's not super exciting. I don't think it's incredible in the format, but it's pretty good. And there would be some formats where it'd be white's best common, but I think there are 2 that are pretty clearly better. I think the second best white uncommon is Salt Road Pack Beast, and this is one where I saw it played so much during the streamer event that I think it might actually be even better than I think, and maybe it ends up being white's best common. But, I liked it in the set review. It's a card that I think is really good. I had it highly rated, from the beginning. And that's because the fail case on the card is 6 mana, 4/3, draw a card. That's not an amazing card, but I don't know. It's like a D, and that's the card's floor. And it's frequently much cheaper thanks to Mobilize, thanks to Endure. It's really not hard to cast it for 4, and it's really, casting it for 3 or less is not entirely far-fetched either. So it represents a very real 2-for-1, and, generally speaking, in most limited formats, cards that can generate 2-for-1s, especially reasonably efficiently, are going to be better even than most premium removal is, like Stormplane Detainment, because the Detainment generally can only get a 1-for-1. Salt Road Pack Beast, going to give you a 2-for-1 pretty much every time. And I have as the number 1 white common, Fortress Kinguard. And like I said, I could see these 2 flipping, but I do like the Kinguard because it's so cheap all the time, and it's just a good rate. You get a 2 mana 1/2 and a 1/1. It's not that hard to generate a 2-for-1 with that, though it is, a little harder than the Pack Beast. It does add 2 bodies to the board. And you can also have the Kinguard be a 2/3 if you're super interested in +1/+1 counters like some Abzan decks are. But, it's a really good card that goes great with the Pack Beast, incidentally. Turn 2, you play the Kinguard, make another body, and then on turn 4, you can play the Pack Beast. And if you played something on turn 1, you can play the Pack Beast on turn 3, which is kind of ridiculous. And you can do that with a bunch of commons. So that tells you a lot about the quality of white's commons, which I think are very deep. I didn't even mention cards like Osseous Exhale and Riling Dawnbreaker, which I think would easily make the list of best commons for most of the other colors. But they don't make it here because I think white's commons are just so deep. And I think white's best uncommon is Sun Pearl Kirin. So it's kind of like the Pack Beast where the floor on this card is a good card. Well, it's even better than the Pack Beast, which is like a D or D plus or something if it's always 6 mana. Sun Pearl Kieran, 2 mana, 2/1, flash flying. It's probably a C-. Like, that's a card that would pretty much always make the cut, especially if you need 2-drops. And it might be even higher in a format that has a bunch of counters and stuff. So, you know, it would be a good card. But then it adds this whole effect that is just so good. Like, being able to bounce your own thing doesn't always come up, especially when you run this out on turn 2. But there are lots of things you can do with it. You know, the typical things that this kind of card can do is save a creature from removal, or rebuy an interest trigger, get an aura off a creature. You know, those are sort of the basic things. You know, it could kind of be pseudo-vigilance, which isn't worth much, but it is something. But it has a lot of different uses that are going to give you really good tempo, where instead of your creature dying, you're now adding a 2/1 flyer to the board and saving your creature. Things like that are really good. But what really pushes this into being, I think, why it's best uncommon, is the fact that you can effectively sack a token to draw a card. And that goes great with Mobilize. It's less good with Endure because Endure tokens actually sit around, but Mobilize tokens don't. So you're effectively paying nothing to draw a card when you can pull that off. And that's pretty good. I mean, that's yet another 2-for-1. And this can generate 2 cards of value really easily, in addition to just being a really efficient 2-drop. So it's a great uncommon. Let's move to blue now, where I think the third best common is Humbling Elder. So this is, we've seen a card like this in many formats, 1 mana, 1/2, debuff something. It's surprisingly good. I remember the first time we saw one of these, I think it was an Eldraine and it was like a fairy, and I didn't think it was going to be good. I was like, you know, lowering power, what's the big deal? But it turns out when you add a creature to the board while doing it, it opens up a whole lot of situations where the effect really, really matters. The most notable of these is just when you flash this in to block a 2/1 by reducing its power to 0, Humbling Elder kills the thing. And that's a play I've already seen in the format. That's a play you're going to see in the format. And it just ends up being quite good at generating those situations. And it's not even the kind of thing that gets, you know, maybe it gets a little less good the longer the game goes. But once you have a bunch of creatures and your opponent's attacking you with something, lowering its power and throwing everything in front of it also ends up being pretty good value overall. And I don't think in most formats I would have it as the third best blue common. You know, there's like a 5 mana 3/3 that bounces something and stuff like that. But I think being a really cheap card with flash has a lot of relevance in blue in the format because of Flurry. You know, you generally want to be able to double spell a significant amount in a lot of the blue decks. Obviously, Jeskai is where that's really concentrated. And Humbling Elder helps you do it in a whole variety of situations. Just because it's cheap and because it has flash, you can sort of make your Flurry feel more like prowess because you can cast that second spell at instant speed. And just being a cheap spell in general has value. In addition to the fact that, you know, this card plays well in Limited. Every time we've seen it, it's played pretty well. I guess the most recent time we saw it was on an artifact creature, and that card ended up performing pretty well too. So yeah, this is probably blue's third best common. I think the second best common is Riverwalk Technique. You know, if you've been watching my content for a while, you know that ever since they started adding one of these 4 mana time ebb like effects where you cast it and your opponent chooses to put it on top or bottom of their library instance, since we've been seeing those regularly, I've always kind of sung their praises. They almost always end up on the underrated video because I think people look at them and they don't think of it as being a 1-for-1 trade because your opponent can get the card back, but it really is one. It is a little expensive. Like if this was a sorcery, it wouldn't be nearly as good, especially because it has another mode. But being an instant does mean you open the door to a lot of nice situations. You can force your opponent to redraw something that isn't especially helpful that could have been able to block. That feels really good. You can get blowouts if your opponent tries to use a trick and things like that. So that card already, without the second mode, has been pretty good in Limited for a while. The one in the last set did underperform a little, but it was still a solid card. And in most formats, this card ends up being one of Blue's best commons. And then this one adds Negate to the mix. You know, if the 4 mana for Negate isn't a great deal, but when you have it on a card you want to play anyway, like, you know, 1 or 2 of in a lot of your blue decks, it gets a lot better. Because, you know, if you have the mana up, and you're planning on maybe using it at the end of your opponent's turn, and then they try to kill your best creature, you just be like, oh, well, I'll counter it. So it just gives you a whole other mode that is certainly relevant, and that makes it, I think, Blue's second best common. Blue's best common, and I don't think it's particularly close, this is one that's, pretty obvious, is Sib Sig Appraiser. 3 mana, 2/1, draw a card. If that's what it said, probably would still be Blue's best common, but it's even better. Not only because you get to do some card selection, because you look at the top 2 and put one into your hand, but also because it lets you put a card in the graveyard. And that is legit value in Blue in the format. You have both of the graveyard mechanics in Blue, namely Harmonize and Renew. So you can put cards into the graveyard for value while drawing a real card. It means you're not going to draw like a land when you don't need one nearly as often because of the card selection. So it ends up being really good. It's probably not quite Oregon Hoarder, which cost 1 more and had +1/+1, and let you dig even deeper and had a useful creature type for the format. Like that was an absurd common. Probably the best blue common we've seen in, 5-6 years, Oregon Hoarder was. This isn't quite that good. Zombie's not relevant. It doesn't dig you as deep, stuff like that. But, it's a great common, and I think you'll play as many of them as you can get in every blue deck you play, which I think even means you can first pick this thing in mini booster packs. For best uncommon, I have Wingblade Disciple. This card is interesting. It's going to be an interesting litmus test for the format in general, because 3 mana 2/2 flyer is a rough stat line, and if your opponent can frequently kill it for 1 mana especially, which is possible in the format, because, there are a few 1 mana removal spells that can do it, if they're doing it all the time, it's going to feel rough. But this flurry trigger is the real deal. It's the kind of flurry trigger that even if you just trigger it once, you're pretty happy. So maybe the best way to play the Disciple is to wait until you can trigger Flurry in the same turn that you play it, to make sure that even if your opponent untaps and kills it, you got that value up front and your creature getting removed doesn't feel so bad. But yeah, this could end up not being Blue's best uncommon just because of the stat line, which does hold cards back these days, 3 mana 2/2 flyer, but the effect is really strong. If it's not the Disciple, I could see it being Veteran Ice Climber. This card just has tons of value, and it's a small sample size, but I went pretty crazy with it in I think the second draft video that should be up on the channel, where there are just so many ways to buff creatures in the format. And the baseline here of 2 mana 1/3 Vigilance, unblockable, mill a card when it attacks is just good anyway. And then it works with itself really well because you can mill things with Renew to buff it. And if your opponent doesn't deal with the thing, they're quickly in trouble. If you're holding on to a Snakeskin Veil and you have this thing in play, games are over in a hurry. There's just so many ways to put counters on it on very good cards that are in this format. So it ends up being, it's kind of an engine all on its own that generates value with its own mill trigger. But yeah, you can do lots of things. You can cast and I've done this already in the format, the blue-green Omen Dragon, cast the Omen side, put 3 counters on it on turn 3. And that, that can just be game over. And I think that's something we're going to see a reasonable amount in the format. And there are plenty of other ways to put counters on it too. But yeah, these are both really good uncommons. I think Blue's pretty deep at uncommon. It's not crazy deep at common, where I think the Appraiser is like great and the others less good. But at uncommon, there are a lot of cards that I could see being the best uncommon. But I think the Disciple and the Ice Climber are sort of the ones I could see it happening with the most. All right, let's move now to black. I think the third best black common is Adorned Crocodile. So, 5-drops aren't exactly things you need a lot of in limited, but this is the kind of 5-drop you want, where it just does a whole bunch of stuff. If you play a 5-mana 5/3, you don't feel great about it, but what's good about this card is if your opponent kills it or you trade off with it, you get a 2/2 back, and you get an ability from the graveyard that can buff one of your creatures. So you just get a lot here for the mana in the end, even if you just look at the 5-mana 5/3 part as not being so good. This is the kind of card that Stormplane Detainment can really punish, though, between being as expensive as it is and needing to be in the graveyard or die for its value, and it just won't happen with the Detainment. But I still think it's a pretty good common. I think black's second best common is Kintree Nurturer. I like most of the cards that have Endure, basically. I think they're all going to perform well in limited because they're all costed at such a point where even if it only ever gave you a token, like you paid 3 mana for a 2/1 lifelink and a token here, you would feel good about that in like any format at all, right? And it comes with another mode where sometimes you need a bigger lifelinker to not die, or you need to have it be able to trade off while gaining you life, or you have counter payoffs. Like there's a bunch of different reasons why you go with the +1/+1 counter. But it's the kind of play that even in the late game, it's hard for you to lose when you cast this on the next turn. I mean, it's not like you're never going to lose, but it helps you stabilize because of the 2 bodies and the life it can gain you, and it does it pretty efficiently. So I like the Nurturer a lot. Like I said, I think most of the Endure cards are pretty good, especially the ones at lower rarities. We've already seen one other one. So you could put a lot of different black commons here that have Endure. There's also the Menace one. I think this one's better because it's cheaper and it can gain you life. You know, it's better defensively and still pretty good offensively than the Menace one is. And then I think Black's best common and possibly a format-defining card is Caustic Exhale. So even if this never had the Dragon mode, it would be Black's best common. So, you know, that tells you something. It's kind of like the Appraiser. You could knock down, make it weaker, and it would still be the best blue common. And I think that's true of the Exhale too, because 2 mana -3/3 instant's a good card, but it frequently just costs 1 mana in this format. Most decks generally have like, you know, 2 to 4 dragons, and having those around isn't crazy. It's going to happen. And when you can pay 1 mana for -3/3, that is a backbreaking play. Like, people are playing 5 mana 3/3 flyers in this format, and if you can kill one of those for a single mana, like, that really is a play that can just win you the game because of the mana inequity that is there. So it's just a great removal spell. You know, early on in the format, it may have been bad luck, but I was playing with the Sultai Signpost Dragon, the 4 mana 3/3 with Renew, and it seemed like every time I played one, someone had Caustic Exhale for 1 mana, and that's the kind of play like I'm talking about. That's pretty backbreaking. Good news is you still renew from the graveyard, but if you can't keep something on the battlefield, it doesn't matter. So that's what I mean when I say it may be a format-defining card, because the 3 toughness cutoff may really matter. Like, you may need to have 4 toughness or more to be a good 4-drop in this format because of Caustic Exhale being so good against anything that has, you know, even remotely inefficient stats. And then I think Black's best uncommon is Gurmag Rakshasa. So yeah, 6 mana 5/5 Menace, +2/+2 to one of your things, -2/2 to one of your opponent's things. It's a huge play. You know, you usually get to kill something and create an attack you didn't have before, and then you still have this huge Menace creature hanging out on the next turn, which is not really a body you can ignore, especially after whatever it did when it came down. I do also want to mention 100 Battle Veteran. These are both, I think, uncommons that are like head and shoulders above the others in Black. This one you can cast from your graveyard, so you know you get a 4 mana 4/2 twice, which is pretty good and limited, and sometimes it'll be a 6/6. So you know, both of those are really good uncommons. Let's move on to red now. I do think red is perhaps the most shallow at common of any of the colors. You know, very early here in the format. It really only has 1 common I'm like excited about, and the rest are pretty underwhelming. I didn't give out even a whole lot of C+s at common in the set review, but I think the 3rd best red common could be Underfoot Underlings. So the rate here is not great. It's sort of funny to compare to the Fortress Kinguard because they're both 1/2s that make 1/1s, and this one costs 3 for the same thing, but it does have another ability, and it can make things unblockable, small things for 1 mana. There are some combos, the 0/4 Vigilance, Mobilize 3 being one of them. Attacking with that after making it unblockable every turn is pretty gross. It's also good with Mobilize creatures in general who have lower power, because you can keep them from dying while still triggering Mobilize every turn with them. But I think most of this card's value is just that you get a 1/2 and a 1/1 for 3 mana. Like, it helps you go wide in a color where that certainly matters. I think red's 2nd best common is Twin Bolt. This card is, you know, this might also end up being a somewhat format-defining card, because a card like this makes it pretty tough to want to play like 2/1s, because, you know, you can, if your opponent has 2 2/1s in play that they paid 2 mana for, and you Twin Bolt them both, like, that's another play that can just be backbreaking because it's a 2-for-1 and they spent less mana than you. That's not how it always lines up, but the flexibility of the card to ping a couple of things or kill a 2-1, do 1 to the opponent, or just kill an X2 is what makes it a pretty good common overall. And then I think red's best common, and it's another one that I think is very clearly better than the rest of the commons, is Molten Exhale. 2 mana for 4 damage at sorcery speed is a great removal spell. And this is often going to be even better because you have a dragon around and you can cast it as an instant. And I think red's best uncommon is probably Equilibrium Adept, as has been a recurring theme with lots of the cards on this list. This would be a good card even if you took away part of what it does, and in this case, I would pay 4 mana for a 2-4 that does the red exile card draw thing 100% of the time. Like, that's already a good card. It's going to give you a 2-for-1. It's a beefy enough body that, you know, your opponent can't just ignore it. And then you throw in the fact that it has Flurry and it can gain Double Strike. And while, you know, a 2-4 is not the scariest Double Strike creature ever, it is pretty hard for lots of boards to block it effectively if they think you might be able to get Double Strike. And obviously, its own ability helps you set up Flurry because it's going to give you an extra card to work with on your next turn in most cases. I do also want to mention Sunset Strike Master, 2 mana, 3-1, taps for red and can kill a dragon later, more or less is what that other ability is. It's also really good. These are both very good uncommons. Ramping your mana is pretty good, obviously enough, and that removal mode comes up a lot. This is a kind of card, though, that Twin Bolt punishes. So, you know, it's the kind of card that if there are a lot of cards Twin Bolt punishes, could slip down the list. But right now, I think, you know, it's cheap enough and powerful enough that it's hard to not look at it as a great uncommon. Right, let's move to green now. Like I said at the beginning, I think green is a pretty deep color for common, comparable to white. I do want to mention Snakeskin Veil just as an honorable mention. It's always hard to put a combat trick on lists like this, just because they're so situational, but this is going to be a card you have to know about in the format. It's going to be a card that you want a couple of in a lot of your green decks in the format because it's so good at blanking removal that costs so much more than it does. And it can even win combat sometimes, and it has some +1/+1 counter synergy. So keep the Veil in mind. I don't think it's as good as the next 3 commons I'm going to talk about, but it's definitely a card you want, and it's definitely very, very good. So I think green's 3rd best common is Deuceute Earthcarver, so another Endure card. This one is 6 mana for a 4-4 with reach and a 3-3, which is pretty good. Like, that rate is a card you'd always play. It's the kind of 6-drop that can stabilize you from pretty far behind, thanks to the 2 bodies that you get. But you can also just make it huge, so huge, that it can even block most of the dragons in the format. And there are times where you're behind and you're looking at a dragon, and that's what you have to do with this. And it's great that it has that mode. You know, I think, you know, it's not quite as good as the 6 mana, 6/6 when this enters gain 4 with cycling 2 from the last set, but it'll occupy a similar slot in decks where it gives you this big reach creature that is good at pressuring the opponent if it has to, but also very good defensively, and that's what the Earthcarver gives you. It is a 6-drop, you know, you probably don't want a bunch of them, but I think a lot of green decks will be happy with a couple of them. Green's 2nd best common is Piercing Exhale. So this is a very good removal spell. You know, we've seen a lot of these Behold cards. The cards in that cycle are just all pretty good. We didn't see the blue one, and I only mentioned the white one in passing, but they're all solid or better. And I think that the black, red, and green ones are especially good. Yet another removal spell. This effect, even without Behold, is good and limited. Instant speed, your creature does damage equal to its power to something else. You know, green always has Death Touch, and it definitely has it in this format. That makes it even better, but you also just have big creatures. And if you get to Surveil on top of that, it is really good, because you get rid of your opponent's creature and drastically improve your next draw while potentially loading your graveyard with value. And then I think green's best common is Trade Route Envoy. This is another card that's sort of like Salt Road Pack Beast in that it can represent a 2-for-1. It's often a 4-mana 4/3 draw card, and that's a great card. And if it's not doing that, well, it's going to put a counter on itself, and you get a 4-mana 5/4 that now sets up all your +1/+1 counter payoffs. So you're pretty happy either way when you cast it, although drawing a card is the better mode. You'll do it either way, and you would play that card 100% of the time, and it's definitely worth a pretty high pick because it's going to give you 2-for-1s a lot. And then I think green's best uncommon is Inspirited Vanguard. So yet another Endure card, and this one is real good because it has an enters or attacks trigger. Man, I remember the day when that only appeared on like mythic rares, enters or attacks triggers. Now we're getting it on an uncommon, and it's a strong one because it endures too when it enters or attacks. And what makes that great, the enters or attacks thing, just on the face of it, is the fact that you get value out of this right away. Like if you make a 2/2 token. So if it gets removed, oh well, you're still probably getting a 2-for-1. And if they can't remove it, well, it's going to attack and do the thing again. And it can do it every single turn, potentially. And I do like, here the modality of Endure is perhaps the best it is on any card, because you can look at your opponent's board and say, okay, well, they have a 3-power creature over there, and I want to be able to attack through it to get another Endure trigger next turn, so I'm going to put counters on it. And then you can look at their board when it attacks and say, all right, well, here's how big their creatures are now. If I make this a 7/6 now, there's no way they can block it effectively. Alternatively, you can look at the board and say, okay, the best I'm going to do is trade here. I'm going to tag with it and Endure 2 again and have 2 tokens lying around while they have to block this thing and lose a creature. So there's just so many scenarios that this sets up where it's really good. It does have a mediocre baseline as a 5-mana 3/2, and there is a window, unfortunately, for Caustic Exhale to kill it if you decide to try to put the counters on it. And that's why I think it's better to make the 2/2 more often than it isn't, because then you don't get completely, your back broken by something like that happening. But this just generates so much value, and, combine it with tricks or removal, and things really run out of control because Inspirited Vanguard just turns into this crazy value engine that can end lots of games. So those are my picks for the best commons and uncommons in the format. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on past videos, including my full set review of the format, the first few draft videos of the format, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.